Hey, welcome everybody to a new episode of Black and Gold Weekly, a weekly Boston Bruins show here on YouTube in partnership with Black and Gold Productions. This is episode 33, and we've got a good one for you here as the offseason rolls along. We've been talking a lot about the Bruins so far this offseason, all of their moves, everything that they've done, free agency, the draft, all of that. We're going to take a little bit of a different episode this week and take a look at the Bruins' competition in the Atlantic Division, talk about them, their division rivals, look at their rosters, see how they stack up, and see how the Bruins stack up with their main competitors in the Atlantic. So this is going to be a fun one. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Before we get started, I just want to give a big thank you to Mark Allred and the entire team at Black and Gold Productions. This show would not be happening without them. So a big thank you to them for all the support. And also, as always, I want to point out the links down in the description of this video. There are 3 of them. The top one is for Boston Bruins apparel. The second one is for NHL apparel of any team, and the third one is for NCAA apparel. And if you are in the market for any of those things, it would be greatly appreciated if you would use those links to go check out all the great selection of products that are available. All the normal stuff like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, sweatpants, all that. Tons of other accessories as well, though, all branded with whichever team that you want. So again, it would be really appreciated, mean a lot if you could check those links out. They are in the description of the video as always. But let's get into it here. We're going to get talking about the Bruins' main rivals in the Atlantic Division. We're going to go through the entire Atlantic Division and just kind of look at the rosters, see where these teams are at. And obviously some teams are in much better shape than others. Some teams are going to be much tougher competition for the Bruins in competing for a playoff spot than others, but we're going to go through it all and take a look at the rosters of the other Atlantic Division teams. So to start, I kind of want to get the lousy teams out of the way. So we're going to start with some of the teams that shouldn't really be competition for the Bruins this year, teams that should make up the bottom of the division. And we're going to obviously start with the Buffalo Sabres. Looking at this roster, this team is in absolute shambles. Obviously, Jack Eichel, injured right now, is a huge question mark. So many thought he was going to be traded this offseason. He hasn't been traded. And, you know, obviously with the neck injury that he has, there's a massive question mark regarding his health as well. So Eichel in or out of the lineup, it doesn't matter. This Buffalo team is looking rough. Honestly, it's not even really an NHL roster. I mean, I feel bad for like Victor Olofsson because he's a decent player, but there's a whole bunch of nobodies in this roster, a whole bunch of guys that barely belong in the NHL, if at all. Decor is terrible. I mean, their planning goal is Craig Anderson and Aaron Dell. I mean, I think that pretty much tells you where the Buffalo Sabres are at right there. Craig Anderson at 40 years old and Aaron Dell are their 2 goaltenders for this year. Obviously, Eichel, who knows what's going on there as far as that injury is concerned. Look at this roster. I mean, this is brutal. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on Buffalo because they will probably be the worst team in the league this year. Definitely will be bottom 3. And, it's not looking good there with the Sabres. So they should not be much competition for the Bruins. Next, we have the Detroit Red Wings. Detroit, obviously, still very much in a rebuild. Again, they've got some good pieces that I really like. And I don't think Detroit is going to be terrible for much longer, especially as some of their top prospects get NHL ready. But I mean, if you look at their prospect list, I mean, obviously Lucas Raymond, Joseph Veleno, 2 guys that are really expected to be making an impact here pretty soon. Moritz Seider's the guy on the back end that looks like he's going to end up being possibly an absolute superstar for them. And obviously they've got some really good young prospects in the pipeline. They're still not a great roster right now, but they do have some good pieces. I'm a huge Dylan Larkin fan. Obviously, Jacob Vrana, really good young player that came into his own after the trade to Washington last year. Tyler Bertuzzi, Robbie Fabry's played well in a Red Wings uniform. Pius Suter coming over from Chicago. He had a great year last year with the Blackhawks. I think he's going to be a really solid pickup. Obviously, Philip Zadina, still young. Hasn't really blossomed yet at the NHL level, but at 21 years old, you might really start to see him coming into his own. On the back end, there's not much right now. Obviously, they've got some really good players coming up. But Filip Hronek is definitely their best defenseman right now. They still need to get him signed. He's an RFA. They have tons of cap space. That won't be a problem. Their veteran guys, Stetcher, Stahl, DeKaiser, Leddy, all UFAs after this coming season, so they'll have a chance to completely redo their decor if they want to after this year. Listen, Detroit's on a great path. They have Stevie Y, probably the best general manager in hockey, as their GM. He knows what he's doing. They're rebuilding. They're not there yet. They're not going to be great this season, but the building blocks are in place for Detroit to be really, really good in a few years. But for this year, they're not going to be much of a problem for the Bruins. And a team in a pretty similar situation, the Ottawa Senators. Again, very, very young team. Lots of good young pieces that I really like a lot. But not there yet. Listen, they're going to be competitive. They're going to play hard. We saw that from them last year. They're a really tough team to play against, which is definitely something you want in a young team. And they're going to give 100% effort each and every night. There is no doubt about that. They're not going to just roll over and let you win. But they shouldn't be winning a lot of games. They're not going to be competing for a playoff spot. They're a team that, again, is young, and they're coming out of a rebuild. They're still kind of in that rebuild, end of that rebuild phase. All of their best players are still very, very young. Colin White is 24. Brady Tkachuk, 21. Drake Batherson's 23. Alex Formenton's 21. Tim Stutzla's 19. Josh Norris is 22. They're a very, very young group, but again, are down the line going to be a big problem and going to be a very good team. And I think that this Senators team, as long as they can keep these young guys developing on the right path, they're going to be really, really good 3-4 years from now. But right now, not there yet. And I don't think they're going to be too much. Boston shouldn't have to really worry about them as far as playoff positioning goes this coming year. Ottawa, Detroit, and Buffalo should be the bottom 3 teams in the Atlantic this year. Those should be your 6, 7, 8 teams in the division. And they really shouldn't be too much of a threat as far as, knocking Boston further down the standings or anything like that. But after that, we get into the top 5. Bruins obviously a part of that, along with the other teams remaining. And these are all teams that will be competing for a playoff spot along with the Boston Bruins. And we have the Montreal Canadiens. Obviously, they went to the Stanley Cup Finals last year. That was definitely a Cinderella run. They were not expected to be that good and go that far. They came up a little bit short in the finals against Tampa Bay, but it's Tampa Bay, and we'll certainly be talking about them later. But Montreal, there's a lot of questions here. Obviously, they had a very mediocre regular season last year, but they were able to really put together a huge run in the playoffs. And we don't know if they're going to be at that level again, if they're going to be able to do anything like that again. Obviously, the biggest thing is they've lost Shea Weber. Shea Weber, losing him off that decor, out of that decor, off that back end, is a massive, massive loss. I don't think there's really any way that they're going to be able to fully replace that. It's definitely going to have to be a by committee thing. There's not one player that's just going to replace Shea Weber. And that could really, really end up hurting this team as far as this coming season goes. Coming back with the same duo in goal, Carey Price and Jake Allen. Now, Carey Price had an awesome postseason, was spectacular in the playoffs. However, he hasn't really been a great regular season goalie for the last few years, so that's kind of still a question mark. What kind of goaltending are they going to get, particularly during the regular season? And in a tough division like this, like the Atlantic here, that's or at least a top-heavy division, are they going to get good enough goaltending to make the playoffs again this year, along with the loss of Weber? They do have some additions. They added David Savard to the back end on a very good team-friendly cap hit deal at $3.5 million, which I absolutely loved. I thought that was a steal of free agency, especially given what other defensemen got. To get a solid middle pair type guy like Savard at 3.5 is fantastic. And then they added up front too, Mike Hoffman coming in. Now, I've never been a fan of Mike Hoffman. I think his overall play leaves a lot to be desired. He wants nothing to do with playing defense. His 5-on-5 game really isn't very good. He's basically a power play specialist, but he's going to make the Canadiens' power play better, and that's definitely an area that they could certainly improve upon. They added Cedric Paquette to the bottom six, the fourth line most likely. They added Matthew Perreault, who's getting up there in age now. Probably won't be a huge addition, but they did lose Corey Perry, so they needed kind of a fourth-line guy in there. I think Paquette will kind of take over that Corey Perry role on the fourth line, or at least as far as, kind of being an agitator. Perreault will probably play on the third line. But they're going to need their young guys. I mean, Cole Caulfield is going to play a massive role on this team this year. Nick Suzuki is going to have to continue to blossom into a great two-way center. I think Jake Evans is going to have to play an everyday lineup in the NHL this year, or he's at least going to have to be the 13th forward and play, well when they need him to. And then obviously Kotkaniemi needs to take that next step. He's been very inconsistent. There's been times where Kotkaniemi's looked really, really good, and then he kind of disappears at times. He needs to get some consistency in his game. And he obviously also here is an RFA and needs a new contract, but that probably won't be a huge issue. They still have their salary cap situation to figure out and whatnot, but they should be able to get Kotkaniemi signed, and they might end up, they're going to have the LTIR space of Shea Weber. So that I don't think has been factored in yet on Cap Friendly. When he officially goes on LTIR, salary cap won't be a huge deal for them because that is almost $8 million in cap relief when he's on LTIR. So, again, interesting team here for sure. There are parts of the Canadiens lineup that I really like. I think there are some really good players, and especially some of these young guys. I'm a huge fan of Suzuki. I'm a huge fan of Caulfield. I really like a heart and soul guy like Brendan Gallagher. I think he brings a lot to the lineup. I love Josh Anderson, although I think, they need to get more consistent offense out of him. I'm a big fan of his style of play and him being a power forward. So there are pieces that I like here. There are also definite questions, particularly what level goaltending are they going to get in the regular season. We know Carey Price is great in the playoffs, but he hasn't been very good in the regular season. And their defense, to me, without Shea Weber, they were a very good defensive team last year. Losing Weber, that's a big hole. That's a big hole to try and fill. And I love the Savard signing, but that's not a replacement for Shea Weber. So I would say the Canadiens are a borderline playoff team. I certainly think they have a chance to make the playoffs, but I also would definitely not be surprised if they ended up missing, particularly with the other teams in the division that they're going to be fighting with. One of those other teams is the Florida Panthers, who had an absolutely spectacular season last year, and I think may have gotten even better this offseason. Florida's Bill Zito, as the GM, has done a tremendous job since taking over with this Panthers team. And I love what they've done this offseason. They've brought in Sam Reinhart from Buffalo. I think he is going to really break out now that he's away from the Sabres. I mean, listen, he played well in Buffalo. Now put him on a good team. We're going to really see what Sam Reinhart's capable of this year. I'm expecting 60 to 70 points, maybe even more than that, but definitely at least 60-point season from Reinhart. Absolutely huge fan of him. They've got the reigning Selke Trophy winner and Alexander Barkov. Huberdeau is still one of the most underrated players in the league and an incredible setup man. Sam Bennett's on a new contract. He played outstanding after coming over from Calgary at the trade deadline last year. Carter Verhaeghe was a breakout player for them last season. Look for him to continue. This team is just... they added Joe Thornton, which I really don't even know why, because their roster was pretty much already filled out, but that's not really a big move. I just think, the addition of Reinhart up front is going to be a game changer and really improve their top six. That was already really good. They're going to get Aaron Ekblad back from injury. He missed the second half of last year and all of the playoffs. He's coming back. Uyghur's got another year of, development, and, he's 27 now, really like in that prime spot. Gustav Forsling had a solid year last year. Radko Gudas really kind of helped them out defensively, and bring some physicality and some, a defensive defenseman to that back end. The defense definitely isn't great. But it's good enough with a team that can score goals the way that the Panthers can score goals. And then in goal, you've got the emergence of Spencer Knight, who I think will be the starting goaltender this year. I think he's going to beat out Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky has not been good in the 2 years since signing with Florida. That contract's an absolute disaster, and they're going to have to find a way out of that at some point. But Spencer Knight, I think, is my favorite young goaltender coming up into the league, or really, I guess, into the league now. And I think he's going to be the guy in Florida sooner rather than later. So there's definitely still some questions as far as defense and goaltending with Bobrovsky, and are they going to be able to keep the puck out of their own net? That was the one thing that really held them back 2 years ago in 2019-20. Was that they just gave up way too many goals. But then last season, their defense was a lot better. They gave up way less goals per game, and then their offense they were one of the top offensive teams in the league. I'm expecting a very similar season this year for Florida that we saw last year. I think this team's going to have a high-powered offense. They're going to be able to put a ton of points on the board, and they're going to score a lot of goals. It's just the question is whether or not they're able to keep the puck out of their own net. If the defense and goaltending is at least adequate, Florida should be a playoff team this year. If the defense or goaltending crumbles, then you could see Florida be a surprise team that maybe just misses out on the playoffs. So they're going to be a really interesting team to watch this year, and they're definitely going to be a tough matchup for the Bruins and for all the other teams in the division. I mean, shutting this forward group down is not going to be an easy task. These guys are probably going to score 3.5-ish goals per game, and that's a lot over the course of a full season. So, this is to me a really interesting team for this year, and we'll see, I feel like they could be as high as first or second in the division, but at the same time, I feel like they could finish as low as fifth if the defense really goes bad and possibly end up not even making the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see what Florida does. Another really interesting team is the Toronto Maple Leafs, because to be honest with you, I don't think the Leafs have really done anything to get better this offseason. Obviously, they still have the big four up front: Matthews, Tavares, Marner, Nylander. They were able to keep Alex Kerfoot because they did the Jared McCann trade, and then Seattle took McCann instead of taking Kerfoot. So they still have Kerfoot there, but after that, there's not much up front. Like, there's not much up front. There's no real depth with this team, especially offensively. You really have like five forwards. Like, Kerfoot's good. Nylander's really good. And then you have Marner, Tavares, and Matthews, who are all, stars or superstars. But, like, after those 5, you're looking at Nick Ritchie as the next highest paid forward on the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, as Bruins fans, we know Nick Ritchie all too well. I mean, sure, he's fine in a certain role, but when he's like your 6th best forward, like, come on. That's not good for depth. Mikheyev is probably better than Ritchie, gets paid less, but is probably better. They brought in David Kampf from Chicago. He's kind of a 4th liner at best. Andre Kasha, other former Bruin, also finds his way into onto the Toronto roster. Now, this guy can't stay healthy to save his life, so we'll see if he actually plays or not. But then you got guys like Engvall and Bunting, and I love Wayne Simmons, but he's a 4th liner at this point in his career. Spets is a 4th liner. Curtis Gabriel's an extra forward. Adam Brooks is an extra forward. Like, they have, obviously, like, their amazing top line, a great second line, but then, like, their 3rd and 4th lines, there's no depth offensively with this team. And their defense still isn't great. They didn't really add anything to their defense this offseason. It's still Muzzin, Riley, Brody, and Hull is their top 4, exactly the same as last year. They brought back Dermott. Sandin looks like he's going to be a full-timer, and Dermott's going to have to be a full-timer on the bottom pair. They lost Bogosian, so there goes some depth. Their defense isn't any better. It's pretty much exactly the same. And then in goal, they swapped out Frederik Andersen for Peter Mrazek, which I look at that as kind of a wash. It's not really an upgrade. I don't think it's a massive downgrade either. I think it's kind of a wash. So I just don't see the Leafs having gotten better. And really, it's going to come down to how far can the big 4 carry them? That's it with Toronto, is how far can the big 4 carry them? Matthews, Tavares, Marner, and Nylander should be good enough with those guys scoring goals to be a playoff team, but they're probably not. They're probably not going to go anywhere. Again, I think Toronto could end up being a pretty big disappointment this year. I would not be overly surprised if they were to have like a really bad season and maybe even miss the playoffs, finish below Tampa, Florida, Boston, maybe even Montreal. I don't think they're going to finish below Montreal, but I guess it's possible. I don't know. If one of these big guys goes down, like if they lose Matthews for half the year, or if they lose Tavares for half the year or something like that, this team could be in big, big trouble. I just don't see any depth at all with this team. Very mediocre defense and the same level of goaltending as they had last season. So, again, I'm not overly impressed with what Toronto's done this offseason, and I think Boston's should be a better team this year than the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then finally, that brings us to the defending Stanley Cup champion, Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously won back-to-back Stanley Cups, 2020 and 2021. Had to dump some salary. Tyler Johnson is gone. They've had to make a few changes. Obviously weren't able to bring back David Savard. But, the core of this team is still together. The important pieces of this team is still together. And because they traded Tyler Johnson for Brent Seabrook's contract, they're going to get almost $7 million in salary cap relief, putting Seabrook on LTIR, which will be enough to pretty much cover what they need to cover with LTIR, so they're not going to be over the cap during the regular season, and they're going to be able to play with their full lineup. I mean, obviously, Kucherov, Stamkos still there, Point still there, just signed a massive extension, so their 3 best forwards all still in place. They still have Hedman, McDonough, and Sergachev on the back end, so their 3 best defensemen all still in place. And they have Andrei Vasilevsky in goal, and I think they actually even upgraded their backup goaltending spot with Brian Elliott, who is definitely better than Curtis McElhaney. So I think they even got better there. They added some depth pieces. That's, they couldn't go out and make a big move and take on a lot of salary, but they could add some depth pieces. They brought in Corey Perry, who again, still a very effective fourth liner at this point in his career. Plays that role very, very well. They brought in Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, another kind of fourth line grinder type guy to fill out the lineup there. Matthew Joseph, I think, is probably going to have a full-time NHL spot this year. Obviously, Pat Maroon's still there. Cirelli's still there. Killorn's still there. They thought, maybe Killorn was a guy that they would have to trade, but that's not the case. Ross Colton really emerged last year, and especially through the playoffs. He'll have a regular spot in the lineup. So, honestly, they've got decent depth. They brought Zach Bogosian back, kind of, I guess, probably as a seventh defenseman. Maybe he's the number 6 and Cal Foot's the 7. Maybe Foot and Bogosian kind of rotate in and out. That certainly is possible. Maybe they give Foot a chance and Bogosian is the 7, and then if Foot falters, being, still just 22, Bogosian comes in. Anyway, they've got decent depth on the back end. Now, what I will say is that beyond their first 7, if they start getting 2-3 defensemen out of their lineup, their depth beyond that isn't particularly spectacular. I'm not looking at any of these guys as guys that I really want playing at the NHL level on a regular basis, like Frederick Claesson or Andre Schuster. No thanks. But, that you'd have to have multiple injuries to get down to that point. As far as, forward depth goes, they've got guys that can get called up. Daniel Walcott's been called up. Remy Ellie's played in the NHL before for Dallas and for Buffalo. Gabriel Dumont's kind of been mostly a career minor leaguer, but he's more of a veteran guy you could possibly bring up from the minors. And then Charles Hudon's played with Montreal, so he could be a call-up if needed. So they've got decent enough depth, especially for the cap situation that they're in. They're decently deep, and their main core is all still together, and the important players are all still there for the most part. So Tampa, to me, is probably the favorite heading into the regular season. With Kucherov healthy this regular season, unlike last year, they're really at full strength, and this is going to be a really, really good team. And as long as they still have Kucherov, Point, Hedman, and Vasilevsky, those are kind of the big 4 guys for me that are really important. They're going to be a favorite. Definitely a contending team again. Now, will they win the Stanley Cup again? Going 3 in a row hasn't been done in a long, long time. Very difficult to do, but you can't count this team out. There's no doubt about that. You can't count them out. So Tampa is definitely going to be very big-time competition for the Bruins this year. So overall, as far as where Boston kind of stacks up with these teams, I obviously Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa, those are the bottom 3. Throw them down to the bottom. Those should be the last teams in the division. Then you have 5 left: Montreal, Toronto, Boston, Florida, and Tampa Bay, to kind of figure out who's going to make the playoffs and who isn't. I definitely think Boston's better than Montreal. I think Boston's better than Toronto, so they should finish ahead of those 2 teams. They're probably not going to finish ahead of Tampa Bay. And to me, Florida is the biggest wild card in this division. Again, like I said when we were talking about the Panthers, I think Florida could potentially be a division winning team, a team that could literally compete for the division win and maybe even beat out Tampa Bay in the regular season. But on the same token, I think they could finish as low as 5th and completely miss the playoffs if their defense and goaltending doesn't hold up. Florida, to me, is the biggest wild card of just, I don't know what they're going to do this season in the entire division. I think Boston could finish as high as 1st or 2nd. I think Boston at the very least, maybe at the very least, could finish 4th if Toronto somehow finishes ahead of them, and Florida, and obviously Tampa Bay. Maybe they finish as low as 4th, but I think Boston is very likely going to finish 2nd or 3rd in this division this year. And they definitely do have some tough competition, but they've got to make sure that they win the games against the Ottawas, the Buffaloes, and the Detroits. If they can take care of business, and obviously may not beat them every single time, but if they can take care of business in a large majority of their games against those bottom 3 teams, and then play well and, play well enough and get some wins against teams like Toronto and Montreal and Florida and Tampa, Boston should definitely be a 2nd or 3rd place team, at least in this division. And again, I think Tampa Bay is probably their toughest competition. Florida could be the next toughest. Toronto might be the next toughest, depending on what Florida does. But Boston stacks up well, and I think should be one of the best teams in the Atlantic this year. So there's no doubt that the Bruins should be making the playoffs. There's no doubt that this is a rather top-heavy division. And there's definitely some questions about a lot of these teams heading into the year. Particularly, to me, Montreal, Toronto, and Florida have a lot of questions and a lot of different ways that this season could go for them. But that's the competition in the Atlantic Division for the Bruins this year. Obviously, going back to the normal divisions, back to the normal schedule. They're not going to, last year every game was in division. This year that's not the case. You're back playing everybody. So they don't have as many divisional games because, well, not every game is in division anymore. But so they are going to have to play more against, Metro teams, and they will be seeing the West teams twice this year and whatnot. But still, winning in divisional games is very important. And making sure that you get the job done against your closest competition in the division is very important, and we'll see how Boston's able to do with that this season. But after a few weeks of, pretty much talking strictly Bruins, I wanted to take this episode and use it to kind of look at the competition and look at the other teams in the Atlantic Division who Boston will be fighting for playoff positions with. And like I said, looking at this division, there are some good teams. Tampa, obviously the defending champs. Toronto, to me, there's a lot of questions this year. I don't think they've gotten any better. Montreal, there's a lot of questions. The loss of Shea Weber might really hurt. And then Florida, to me, is the biggest wild card. I think Florida could be better than Boston. I think Florida maybe could be worse and not have the year like they did last year. So that's a huge question mark for me with the Florida Panthers. But Boston, I definitely think should be at least 2nd or 3rd in the division and definitely will be making the playoffs. But that is episode 33. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk about the other teams in the division that will be competing with the Bruins this year for those playoff spots. And thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Again, a big thank you to Mark Allred and the entire team at Black and Gold Productions. Be sure to check out all the writers' work at blackandgoldhockey.com. Check out the podcast network as well. There are a bunch of great Bruins shows, podcasts coming out, available wherever you listen to your podcasts, out on all platforms. Again, just want to mention the links down in the description. Boston Bruins apparel, any NHL team apparel, and NCAA college apparel, whatever school you want to rep. 3 links down in the description, all there for you. Wide variety of products, almost anything you could want. So if you're in the market for any of those things, it would definitely be appreciated if you could check it out. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I'll be back next week with episode 34, and we'll have more Bruins talk on the way. But thank you guys again, and have a great weekend. Talk to you guys soon.